Hey guys, my name is Nina Means. I'm director for Austin Community College Fashion Incubator. I've got my son here. He's joining me on Workshop Wednesdays today. We are going to we're going to be doing a talk on just a continuation. We started product development last week and gave you an overview of what the product development cycle looks like. Um, and what we're going to do is we're going to go over a bit more about that and the samples that are involved with creating your product development. Sit still, okay? And so, one of the things that we're going to be doing is really focusing on going through the product development cycle. I'm just going to overview what we did last week. And then, what we're going to do is get into the details for just a bit more about the sampling, because product development actually goes through a variety of different deliverables that you're going to want to get a chance to evaluate. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a bit more information on that experience. Just a second, pump. Just a second. All right. Why don't you hold on to this? The pandemic does have us all working from home, and so it keeps everything very interesting. But thank you so much for bearing with me as we go through the information. So we're looking forward to giving you guys some really great info today on product development. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen with you so you can see what's going on. All right, so you guys were here with me before. And what we did was we actually reviewed this document for the product development cycle. I used to teach at the Art Institute. I've taught product development kind of an intro level, but I've also taught product development for advanced students and for independent study. And so a lot of what we do is we try to mimic the experience that you would do if you were working in a design office in New York or California or wherever you may be working, or even from here in Texas, because we do that here. So the product development cycle from the core is relatively the same where you work, but sometimes these things are tweaked for proprietary reasons for the way that we go into the market. So some of these are a little bit faster than other spaces, and some of them are slower. So it just depends on who you're working for. So I want to do a quick recap of what we talked about last week. And the product development cycle really starts with concept. Concept will probably be informed by a lot of different pieces of information. It may be inspired by what you have left over in inventory from the previous season. So there's some concept that may be driven from there. There may be some concept that's pulled from street style or from trend reports or other places. But wherever it comes from, the concept gets pulled together of where are we going for this delivery, for this season, for this collection. And so we'll go into concept, design. We do a sketch review where we're looking at all the sketches and ideas that we have. And then we do like an initial pass to our technical team to get our first sample in. From that first sample, we actually review that sample in a prototype meeting, and then we'll evaluate that prototype about whether or not it should go forward. After we decide whether or not it should go forward, we decide if we need an approved sample for design, if it needs to go into fittings, and then if it needs to go into production. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to take you through just a few sample flows for this particular discussion. One of the things that I want to remind you of what we talked about last week was that sourcing and costing happen throughout this entire process. So what do I mean by that? Whenever you are sourcing your materials, this is something that you're going to be doing throughout your entire product development cycle until it's pencils down going into production, pretty much. So what are you sourcing? What does that actually mean? You're finding the materials that you're going to actually put into the garment. So whether it's your body fabric is what we call it, and it's like maybe it's cotton, maybe it's wool, maybe it's silk. And it's a different weight, or maybe there's some really interesting details to it. All of these things are going to get a chance to find the best possible price, the best possible goods, and the availability and the quantities that you going to become very, very important here, because you will have a specific price point that you need to hit in the market. And you can't have material that's going to be too expensive or a design that's too costly to execute. And so this product development cycle is really where you test all of that out before you create a ton of them and then try to figure out how to sell it. So this is a very, very important part of your process. I want to go over sample flow. So I'm going to go into this next one about how are you like, what are the deliverables in the product development space? Typically, it's dotted with a lot of meetings. If you're working by yourself, you'll be meeting with yourself and maybe a contractor or maybe an assistant that you've hired. But typically we go through a variety of stages of sampling in order for us to get through the product development space. So I want to share with you, this is an adapted model of content. I believe Michelle Washington founded an image and we just kind of, tweaked it just a little bit. But Michelle, if you're watching, thank you. We really appreciate your support on that. The development sampling stage is really important here. The prototype, really, when we're talking about product development, this is everything that's happening before you go into production. And really that line of demarcation, guys, that space where it goes from development to production is, are you making it for like testing or are you making it for selling? That's kind of how I like to think about it. A lot of people will have their own ways to demarcate it. The production is literally like, are you making a ton of them? Or are you just making, just a couple to test it and make sure it's right? So in the development sampling stage, our first time that we ever see, the first time that Band-Aids, the first time we ever see the sample is in the prototype, in the Proto Sample. And so this is the first time that, the factory is taking their first chance at executing what you've requested in your tech pack. If you are wondering what a tech pack is, we actually went through every single page of a tech pack in our previous discussion on technical design. So if you want to go back to our YouTube channel to check that out, check out that video there, or series of videos there on technical packages. We did do a recap video so that you don't have to go back and watch every single one right away, but you may find that that will be really useful if you're trying to build your own. So that proto sample is really what the result is of that very first development tech pack. Then it goes into what we would call a, before I get into that, the proto sample, if you guys remember, and I'm going to go back here, the proto sample is where we actually did a review in a proto review meeting. So this is the very first time that everyone's sitting down seeing the samples together. This is really key because you'll see very quickly what executed and what didn't. And so you'll get a really good idea about whether or not it's something that you want to go forward with in the collection. It'll also tell you if there's holes in the collection. So for example, a lot of times whenever we look at the entire group together, we want to see that there are pieces that work together in someone's closet, or that there's an upsell opportunity with different samples side by side. And so if I have a piece that doesn't really have a friend in the collection, like it doesn't match anything, it doesn't sit next to anything, it doesn't share fabric with anything, if it's not designed to be like a halo piece where it's like the one shining moment in the collection and everything else is actually creating my value and profit margin, then that's also a reason why I may drop that style, because there may not be a reason for it to exist, because there may not be anything that hangs with it. It's kind of what we call it. Is there anything that hangs with this? And so they typically literally want to hang next to each other. Think about like outfit completers or a jacket and pants or like a cool top and like a matching fun short or something like this. There's a lot of like matchbacks right now where you've got like matching sets. And so there's a reason for them to exist together because they share fabric, styling, maybe even a couple of details, but it helps you in the long run for a lot of reasons that we don't have time to explain right here, but trust me, it does help. So that's the first time we're seeing the prototype sample. It's coming from the tech pack that you sent to your factory, or maybe you have a sample room that you're working with that's executing that sample for the very first time. So then the next thing that we have is what we call a salesman sample. So this sometimes is I've seen it. depending on how good your prototype is, it may turn into your salesman. So a lot of times they'll create what they call duplicates. Dupes is what they'll say. Like, oh, did the dupes come in? Your duplicate samples typically happen to be your salesman samples. So salesman for who? Salesman for who? So if you are selling to a buyer, or if you're selling to, like to another store, these salesman samples are incredibly helpful, because typically what it means is that you literally have, a sales representative. That may be you. If you are in a small business, you may not have, a sales rep on hand for you just yet. But a salesman sample is what you take to the buyer to represent what it is that they will receive in their store from you. And so you want that salesman sample to be as precise as it possibly can be. And so typically when you go into these samples, what you don't want to do is to do like the bait and switch. You don't want to say, this is what you're getting, and then this is something that's not exactly that, or it cut corners, or it's less expensive, or if it doesn't really meet their expectations, the color's off or something like that. So those salesman samples, as a part of the development phase, is really key, because what you want to do, if you can, is you actually want to sell that collection before you go into production. You want to, that's the goal. That's the dream. You don't want to have anything left over. You don't want to have, hardly any inventory. And so what we want to do is we want to get purchase orders for the salesman off of the salesman samples before you go into production, so that most of that stuff is already accounted for. Someone's already claimed it before you've put a ton of money into making a ton of product. That's where a lot of businesses fall, is because, there may not be a buyer, for that. And they're just maybe they're stocking a store, and they're just hoping that someone will purchase it. And that's, oh, it's a little nerve-wracking, guys. I don't know, but that's the way we've done it. And so merchants have really been kind of the soothsayers of what's coming up and how much of it we should buy, and based on how it's purchased, how it's been done in the past, and what comes up next. And so all of those things are key, reasons why that salesman sample has to be as precise as possible. The photo sample, in part, is kind of the same thing. So if you are doing a photo sample and say you want to test it on social media or on your e-commerce site, and you say coming soon, and you want to see how sticky that image is, or how long people stay on your site because that image is there, or how many likes you're getting, or when is this coming out, audience engagement on your social, all of that information is really helpful in terms of helping you to kind of consider how popular or unpopular a style is going to be before you make a ton of product. But that photo sample, could be, what goes on to the runway. It could be what happens for, your photo shoots, as well as what you use to go to your buyer. So these are all things that are key to happen in the development phase, as opposed to you having, 100 blazers or 1,000 blazers, or God forbid, 5,000 blazers, and no dedicated customer. This is why this is so important. So you'll get into the salesman sample. Hopefully you'll, be selling like hotcakes, and they've already decided when they need it delivered. How quickly you can get it to them, all the good stuff, right? Well, we need to make sure that whenever it arrives to them, that the fit is right. And so we need to actually work on going through our fit sample to make sure. We need to go through our fit sample. You okay? Ew. No, so you don't want. All right. So that fit sample is really key. So the fit sample is really important for you to know that the garment is going to satisfy the customer and the buyer as you promised that it would. So if it fits a certain way on the model, you're going to want it to fit that way on the customer. So you'll have to make tweaks to the sizing to make sure that you're able to deliver that. Sorry, just trying to make sure I've got my, I think we're good. Yeah. So then the last thing, guys, on the development sampling side. Okay, good. We've got good timing. Thank you. There you go. Is the pre-production sample. So this pre-production sample is really, really important. Actually, before I get into pre-production, let me finish with fit sample because fit is really, really key. If you don't get fit right, you are going to waste your time and your money and your energy. If your customer loves the way that it looks on the model, I've had this experience before. It looks a certain way on the model, and then you try that garment on in the dressing room, or you order it online and it shows up at your house. So you open up the box and you put it on, and it doesn't look like what you saw online. It doesn't fit the way you saw online, and the size chart matches what you thought you were supposed to be. Your customer is going to be very, very disappointed, and they may not come back. That's how serious it is. So making sure that you really understand your fit of the garment, how the fabric is behaving with the fit, what happens when you wash it. We do something called wear testing. Wear testing is so, so, so important. Wear testing tells you a lot. It tells you about the fabric performance. It tells you about how it actually feels on your body beyond just having it on the fit model for the 10 minutes during a fit session or 30 minutes during a fit session. Whenever you wear test a garment, you really understand how long it takes before it starts to pill at times. If it's like a very like pill, what I'm talking about. It's like those little balls that show up on the surface of your clothing sometimes whenever there's a bit of friction. Those things are become really, really important for you to wear test your goods, because you never know what thing you're doing in a long-term sense that may be affecting your sales without you realizing it. So there may be some initial, joy in the purchase, and the first or second time they wear it, they're okay with it. But then the third or fourth time or fifth or sixth time someone goes in to wear it, they may not see the value in investing in your brand again, because it may not meet their expectations in terms of performance, in terms of silhouette, like if it loses its shape, or if the color isn't even what they expected. I actually bought a blouse online one time, and online it looked like it was this beautiful shade of like dusty purple. Like it was like a really nice, like grayish purple shade. When it got to my house, when I ordered it and it showed up at my door, I opened it, and I kid you not, I thought they sent me the wrong shirt. I really thought that it was absolutely the wrong shirt. And the problem was is that the color was literally like this, like it was a gray that looked dead inside. Like it was just very just flat. It had no purple tones to it. It was just very bland gray. And I was, and I like gray, clearly. I like to wear gray. But I wasn't expecting it. And because I wasn't expecting it, I can honestly say I have not made a single purchase from that website since then. And that was probably 6 years ago. That's a big deal. Just having that moment of something not meeting your expectations. So the fit sample, and by the same token, becomes exceptionally important. Then you get into something called the pre-production sample. If you're in industry, you call it the PP sample, literally two P's. PP sample is a pre-production sample, and that happens before you go into production. We get it. And so this is just, before we say we're ready to make 1,000 of these, this is a sample that we're agreeing to. Now, once I get into the production sampling stage, I'm going to want to see what is on the top of production. So literally, like, what are the first samples that are coming off of the production line? And they send that to me as a confirmation that what I ask for in the pre-production sample is actually happening in production. I will tell you, I've seen places cut corners and change things in production that were agreed to pre-production. So the TOP going to happen throughout. Now, some factories will actually find ways to reduce their cost in labor by changing some orders of operations, provided that it doesn't change the integrity of what you agreed to pre-production. Completely okay, completely legitimate, and it's really smart on the side of the factory to do that. However, I've seen some factories take that a step too far and change primary components that actually conflict with your pre-production sample. So this is really where you want to reconcile the two and make sure that what you requested and what you're getting top of production is accurate. So as they continue through, that it's true, that it's right. Now, the size set or size run is something that I've actually seen. Um, it is something that happens in the production sampling stage. And I've always kind of felt a bit conflicted about it because I was like, I want to see it beforehand because I've seen changes that people have made in the size set to certain sizes afterward. And I kind of feel like that should have happened beforehand, because if they're already running production and I'm like seeing some major changes about how the pocket's sitting on one size to the next, I'm a little concerned that there's probably already units or garment samples behind the things that I'm seeing that are wrong. And so I would actually be more concerned about not being able to catch it in time, because we're still, so typically, like, there should be some kind of stop at some point that says, once we've confirmed that all the sizes are correct, now keep going. And I think that's what a lot of places will do. But you'll have to make sure that you communicate very clearly with your factory, because everyone may have a different way of processing their workflow. And so, minor tweaks. I'm not talking major changes. Most places have a similar order of operations, so to speak. But I would make sure that you're clear. Make sure that what works in that space. And then it's really the shipment sample. So what you want to know is, okay, we've gone through the top of production. We know what everyone knows what they're making in production. Everyone knows what the sizes should look like. And then, we need to know what's actually shipping, and so I've actually seen it some places where they'll stop at TOP and I may not ever see a shipment sample depending on the company I've worked for. But I think the shipment sample is a really good way to work, because that way you are like, sure, then sure. Typically, it's kind of taken out of a percentage of what's happening in the quality assurance testing point. So they will kind of do a random sample of what's happened in production, maybe 20% or 30% or 10%. It just depends on your company, it depends on the volume of the business. And then some places will do a 100% quality assurance check. But that shipment sample, what's coming out, is key. It's really, really important. So be sure you're aware what your factory will do. Whenever it's really, really small units or really small orders, 100% checks are pretty normal from my experience. But whenever I work for companies that do 5,000 units, and that's a small order, or they'll do 60,000 units, typically the quality assurance check is a percentage that's much lower for percent check on 60,000 units, or 100,000 units. Imagine that, checking 100,000 pairs of jeans or 60,000 pairs of jeans. That's how big some of the orders were when I worked for other companies. So that shipment sample is really key to know what's coming in. And so that if there's anything that is wildly different from that, then that's whenever you'll want to go back and say, hey, we've got a problem. And we'll see how many boxes are representative of that. And that's actually where, your contract now these become contract samples for you. And so you really want to be able to say, this is what we agreed to, this is what you said I had. And if you find something that's outside of that, that may be grounds for anything like a refund or a credit or a remake or even a cancellation. So just be aware that any of those things, depending on the size of the company, the size of the order, the complexity of the product, there are a number of things that may go into it. And then whether those things are actually out of tolerance from what was requested, if they change from what you agreed to in the top of production or corrected in size set. All of these things are, key points throughout your process to be able to catch errors. And it really demonstrates whether or not clear communication happened. whether goods arrived on time to be incorporated into the garments. I can't tell you how many times I've had, trim delayed because you're doing like logo engraving on them, and the factory's waiting for that logo trim, that logo zipper puller, that logo little stud that goes onto garments at times, waiting on that, and then insert something as a substitute that they just had lying around. You really don't want that to happen, because now this is affecting your brand. So if your top of production comes back with a substitute zipper puller, send it back and say it needs to go with the trim. Because if you approve that top of production sample and then you get to shipment sample and it has all of those substitute, no logo, very expensive trim that you developed, but it never made it onto the garment, you said okay to the top of production. So these things all have to be, vetted and verified throughout the entire process. Top of production needs to look like exactly what you want to sell. End of story. Exactly what you want to sell. So by the time you get to shipment, it needs to be like, okay, we did it, and check off that final checkbox. The customer should be happy, the buyer should be happy. There's different phases where you may get buyer input. I typically save all my buyer input just for the development phase. However, depending on the size of the company, buyers will also have input during the production stage as well. It just depends on who you're working with, how you're working, and at what points you are willing to incorporate buyer comments, as a small business, as well as a larger company. So I think that if your buyer is especially if it's a primary vertical buy, if they want to, add in comments, and if they don't feel listened to, that it's going to affect your sales. So you definitely want to make sure that they are happy with what they're getting. But there is a pencils down moment, where you'll have to say, okay, this far and no further. We've incorporated everything that's requested, and we want to move into, we're ready to go. So I think that there's always kind of a push and pull with that. I've always seen that with different companies, buyers who are designing, and designers who are, trying to sell, and so there's a bit of a give and take in that space. So again, guys, I just wanted to give you an update, or just an overview of what these different samples mean to you and what kinds of things you should be thinking about. Again, this is our conceptual overview of what the product development cycle looks like. I'll kind of use this as kind of a header up front for each of the classes, just to remind you. I think that was really helpful. Michelle Washington actually did that image for us the first technical design course, where we always had kind of a reference point to start off with in terms of our recap. So it just gave us an idea of where we were. This is kind of the same kind of thing, except for now we're layering in a bit more information on the samples that are happening throughout this process. So looking forward to talking to you guys more about product development. This is really kind of an exciting time for us to get a chance to share this with you and open up our world in a meaningful way. Can't believe we're already at time. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here and just say thank you so much for joining us. I still have like a whole other slide that I could have gone over with you. There's so much to talk about, and we'd love to get a chance to share with you more. But definitely tune in to us next week for Workshop Wednesdays. We're going to continue with product development here. And again, if you haven't joined us on our social media, please join us at ACC Fashion Incubator. That's on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Actually, on Twitter, we are at ACC Fashion Incube, because Twitter, it's too long. But if you type it in, it'll pop up. You'll see us. Same interlocking FI. And then for any of our stuff that's coming up here, we actually have some really cool courses that are coming up. Join us on our emails, because we'd love to tell you all about it. It's fashion.incubator@austincc.edu. We've got a really cool class coming up with Macy's, and I'd love to get a chance to tell you more about it, but we've run out of time. So send us a quick email, fashion.incubator@austincc.edu, and we will catch up with you guys next time. Thanks so much for your time today. And again, my name is Nina Means, Director of Austin Community